Seamus Hoyer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored.
Hey, I'm happy to finally get you on here.
Yeah.
So, can you give me a little background on your career progression and your thought process around surrounding changing jobs?
Yeah, I think I probably have. I would like to think I have a pretty unique career progression so far. And I would say you do too in some sense. Yeah, obviously a lot of people enter the military, right? But I think for you, it's all part of a larger goal for you. I think you have a pretty well thought out plan. Don't know if mine's as well thought out, but so basically, like I started working for Robertson's, a florist and event company locally, right in our neighborhood. I started working there in college. Funny enough, my aunt worked there, and she was like HR, accounting, one of more important people there, I would say, influential people there. She asked me if I wanted to work there just as like a college job, and that just developed into almost a full-time job when I was still in school. And then, despite having the pandemic, I still ended up right around when I graduated college, I still ended up staying there, even though that was a perfect opportunity to reset. I really had a great appreciation for them, the people that own the company. Again, smaller family-owned business. So I stayed there post COVID, post graduation. Progressed through different roles when I was there. Started in the warehouse and delivery department, but not even making deliveries. Went into events, and that kind of helped me see the whole operation of the back end in the warehouse. From there, moved towards the front house operations, so sales, and then eventually left there, which was a tough decision because working for a family-owned company, I think there's a lot of people that have been there for decades, and I think those are the types of places where you see a lot of loyalty, which is maybe more of an old school trait. So having been there for so long and been so committed to it the whole time, I'd never really pictured anything else. So having left there after making that tough decision, I took about 9 months off to try to figure out a projection for where I want to go with my career, what I want to do next, just because I never had that moment after college, like a lot of people do when they graduate. That's when they decide what direction they want to go. From there, I went to Gerhard's Appliance, another family-owned business, smaller. We have about 100 employees, and we have a pretty big balance sheet, do a lot of revenue in a year selling appliances. It's a pretty big operation with 6 showrooms. But again, still family-owned business, so I think that's very much a different dynamic than, a lot of people going to work for a big corporation or something like that right out of the gate.
Yeah, no, I remember, having conversations with you during a few of these transition periods, and something that I picked up on from you was it seemed like you really valued the relationship between you as an employee and the employer, or like the higher leadership. And I'm wondering how that impacts your decision to stay or go at a specific job.
I think the nice thing about working for a family-owned company, right, and both of these companies are great examples of it, since it's a smaller hierarchy from, bottom of the totem pole associate to the top, there's, a lot more familiarity with the people that you're working for and therefore kind of like the values that you're representing. You get to have a lot more influence too. But I think ultimately, like to what you're talking about, the relationship and the relationships, because you're right, where there always was a lot of talk with like my relationship with ownership. I think one of the nice things about working in these types of places is the relationships with other people too. A lot of like-minded individuals thinking the same way, kind of there for, if not like to serve the family that owns the company, then to have more of a family environment where you're coming to work, and making decisions and putting a certain type of work ethic out there because you're considering the people that you're affecting as you go. So I think when you go to a place with a larger hierarchy, there's so much more separation, like diffusion between, levels within that hierarchy, that you don't get that same personal feel. And for me, I felt like I felt like I was afraid it would be a little soulless if I didn't have that, and just going to work, not really knowing who you're working for or the people that you're working with. I'm learning that there's pros and cons to these structures, and I've done two very similar, so I'm starting to see, having done a second one that is similar, you're starting to realize, okay, this is a trait of this type of hierarchy. This is a trait of this type of structure working for a family as opposed to a corporation. Again, starting to learn pros and cons, but yeah, I definitely always emphasized uh, that relationship and wanting to work with good people.
Is that a realization that you came to during that, almost a year that you went into mini retirement?
Mini retirement was a great time, fun employment. Um, I think the search process when I was in that transition period between jobs, as they say, for 9 months, for a pregnancy's worth, I think I just ended up de facto really like falling into the same mindset maybe that I had continued at Robertson's, where there was more faith in working for a smaller company, a smaller entity, where there was more connection between people. Um, I don't know how predetermined it was to end up at a place like that. I think so. These are all qualities of the two jobs we've talked to, and I think my point is that some of it was pre-planned, but some of it also just happens to be a result of decisions I've made. And the decisions that I've made, I think, the more so influence. Like in that time unemployed, I started to learn more about my education decisions, right? Because this was the first time, like kind of like I was just referencing, like, it was the first time I had to test the open market. So it's where your resume really counts, and you put that together, and you're looking at your qualifications, and it was tough. I think I was like vocal about this with you. Like I felt very qualified because I had such a well-rounded experience at Robertson's, and I think that's true times 10 now after Gerhard's. I wear so many different hats there, same way as I did at Robertson's. But I realized like putting together a resume, it also just kind of ends up looking scattered. And so I kind of learned, I don't want to say regrets, but there was hindsight to like decisions I made about education, mostly referencing right now like that I was a marketing major, but I didn't get a great grasp of like SPSS or any coding language or a lot of the back end type of stuff that you can do in marketing with, search engine optimization and stuff like that. So without those qualifications, a degree in marketing kind of just felt like it opened doors to sales jobs, and you don't really need a degree to sell. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but from what I've seen, I mean, I work with some guys that didn't graduate college, and it's pretty evident, but they are like savant type salespeople. So that would be one of those potential regrets where it's like maybe I should have just majored in finance. You know what I mean? And open the doors, open some other doors, with those qualifications.
Yeah. I've definitely had a similar experience in the army of just wearing a lot of different hats. And for me, I've still gotten the opportunity to specialize for sure. Um, but it's also, broadened my perspective in being able to see all kinds of jobs I don't want to do, getting these little pieces of like, I don't really want to do logistics or do event planning or something like that. But, oh, I really like technical work, or I like, working, like managing small groups or something like that. Have you seen like a similar pattern with yourself?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, so like, so you do wear a lot of different hats in the job, you do, or at least like the progression of it in the last 4.5 years?
Yeah, definitely in the progression, like um, even the technical work, the first 3 years that I did were in a completely different vein. Not completely different, but definitely a different vein than the technical work I do now. But also, in the Army, you do your specific technical work, which for me is cybersecurity, but also you have to plan events, you have to give trainings on, you know, HR type stuff, which is like, equal opportunity, sharp or harassment, um, suicide awareness, like all of these HR type things. You also do you conduct technical trainings to junior personnel, and you also go to more senior trainings, senior technical trainings as well, and then you plan events, and it's just like there's just a lot of different things to do, and that's just a couple of them. Those are just the couple I can think that I've done off the top of my head, but there are plenty that I haven't done. Um, and the reason I haven't done them is because I've seen other people do them and been like, I don't really want to do that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, because like I mean I can definitely relate to that. Like so in a given, I think Gerhard is a good example. My current role, like I came in as the basically like assistant to the sales director, assistant to the regional manager type of vibes, you know, and so that was kind of like the plan, just because he had so much on his plate. Like basically the way our structure is set up within sales, 30 to 40 sales consultants, maybe one or two other kind of people who help within the showrooms. But then we had my boss, who's the sales director, overseeing the whole, you know, all six showrooms and their staff. And so basically, I mean, he's brilliant. I think honestly, I mean, he's one of the reasons why I've been here for a year and a half is because even though it's a family-owned business, he takes a lot of pride in his job, and he has very much like a growth-oriented mindset, which lends itself to sales, obviously. But I think that's like the nature of a corporation is shareholder value and growing the company. So sometimes you see that lacking a little bit in a family-owned environment, but my boss has been so good to drive growth. He had all of these ideas, all of these ways that we could do quality control, you know, more kind of outbound. It's retail, but he's got ideas of how we can do outbound and find clients instead of marketing, bringing them in. So he just needed help. That's what I came in to do. And now it's just kind of blossomed into so many different things. You figure out, they find strengths that, you know, you maybe didn't like apply to utilize, but just in the course of the the business year and all the different tasks they give you, they find those. I think in a smaller environment, you're definitely going to have to do more job sharing and job rotation. It's not as the more employees you have, the more specialized one person could be at one task because there's more volume. We don't have that here. That's where Robertson's is a great example. Like the floral industry would be a brilliant thing to teach in a supply chain classroom because it is the definition of feast or famine. There's such high highs around the holidays, right? I mean, that's where our average delivery per day would maybe be, 80 to 100 deliveries. Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, the 3 or 4 days leading up to that, it's 500 a day. So that's such a spike in demand. It creates all these labor challenges, especially using perishable products. So, so my point is, uh, coming into Gerhard's, I've just picked up a bunch of different tasks and they've all stuck, which is putting me in a tough spot now for sure. But in a given week, I mean, like right now we're hiring, so I'm doing phone screenings and I'm doing interviews as well, like in-person interviews. I do our internal newsletter. I'm one of like three people that runs our customer service department, which is just like when things can't get solved in the showrooms by a store manager and stuff, it gets escalated to us. I'm selling. Again, started by supporting my boss's clients. Now I'm selling directly to them and have some of my own too. So I mean, that's like, those are all things that somebody could be doing as one job at a different place, to your point. Oh, and I'm doing like, I'm making training videos, I'm scheduling training for brand reps to come in. So, to your point, right, like in terms of all these different things that have crossed my path, the one that I'm the most focused on right now, and this is the most proactive mentality I've had, I think, as far as a career goes, is the video production element, making these training videos. Having the full access to the Adobe Suite right now just gives me such an opportunity to learn, something that costs a couple $100 a year. Gives me a reason to use it. And right now I'm actively trying to make that a bigger portion of my work week because I like when I, eventually whenever I leave, I want that to be a bigger part of my resume. That's one of the things I've learned so far between Robertson's and Gerhard's is but you should probably take a proactive approach to the job that you're doing, especially in a situation like you and I have where you wear a bunch of different hats. Because yes, you could come in and just go with the ebbs and flows, but when it comes time to leave and put together a resume for your next step, that's a synopsis of everything you've just done. And at the end of the day, you want to actively propel yourself into your next role. So I'm starting to think about that a little bit more now.
Is that um, what you described there, but also you have kind of feeling like you had a scattered resume? Is that something let's say at the time of applying to Gerhard's and looking at other job opportunities, is that something you saw as a disadvantage or an advantage? Obviously, describing your resume as scattered is kind of, has a negative connotation. But out of that, you ended up finding that you were really into this video production aspect, right? Which you weren't necessarily going to find if the hats you wore or the job you applied for was, stringently focused on the job description. So I'm wondering if that was something you recognized before, or if that's something you were able to recognize, I guess, more recently.
No, I would say that's retroactive too. To your point, I think retroactively thinking about it, it goes to show that I was still very much in a transitory phase, a decision-making phase, still trying to find what I want my career to be in. I guess is how I would describe that. And I hope that's relatable to people. I'm always shocked. I would feel like you would agree with this. Like, I'm always shocked when, or I was shocked when we would be in like high school, maybe like I'm thinking freshman, sophomore year. Somebody says what they want their career to be in, and they stick to that through high school, undergrad, maybe even grad school. That ends up being 6, 8, 10 year commitment, and they've never wavered, which I think is admirable. I think I could never be that person. I think I'm just too interested in too many things to say, oh, that's the one. That's the one I'm going to do. I'm going to stick with that. So kudos to anybody who can do that. It's probably a lot easier, and you've got your decision made by the time you graduate college, and you're off and on path. But for me, it's been I'm still figuring it out. I guess is really what that looks like.
Yeah, I won't say I envy it. I think there are advantages to both sides, and at the end of the day, whatever you're passionate about, you're passionate about. That's kind of how my dad was. He pretty much knew he wanted to go into microbiology since he was like a kid, and just continued doing that, and has been doing that his entire life. Um, but yeah, as you know, like I went to school, then I left school. I also took a year off and just took a ton of time to think about the things I wanted to do, and what I wanted my future to look like. And I'm curious if you have a similar, or at least somewhat similar, process in trying to navigate the kind of career you want. Because I look at the kind of overall lifestyle that I want, or the lifestyle design. Like I want to be able to work from home a decent amount. I want to be able to travel a decent amount. I want to have free time to work on other projects that perhaps in the future become full-time projects, and that kind of hems in all of the possible choices that I might have into something that's a little more narrow and defined.
Yeah. So I would once again say that that's something that I'm only kind of just starting to think about. But this kind of, I think what you talk about innately references like a work-life balance, which is something that I did think about at Robertson's and definitely thought about it the busier times of year and when I was frustrated. Unfortunately, a similar trait of both jobs, but to that point is that because I have different tasks, my plate feels very full all of the time. Even when someone who's just in sales, it's go time for them around maybe President's Day weekend and the sale period. And our sale periods are pretty long, of course, right? I mean, rebate windows could be 3, 4 weeks. It's very similar to the car industry in that sense. But then they might have downtime at other points of the year, and I feel like my plate's always relatively full. Right now, for sure, I'm thinking about that work-life balance, and I'm thinking about kind of like what you alluded to, how it impacts my not just time, but also energy and motivation to tackle those different projects. I mean, we've had our side project of WhosRecords, but the soccer team DMA is a massive time expenditure for me. But it's one that doesn't feel that much like work, which is obviously great. It's probably a good sign. And there's so many things I want to do with it, and I'm realizing now that I want to have like the free time and the energy not to be burnt out and to be able to come home and just work on those things. And what goes into that? I mean, right now our season's about to start, so I got to put together the roster, which has some decision making elements in its own right. Figuring out what to charge guys, which is obviously a huge financial liability, also potential to make a couple $100. I mean, I would probably put most, if not all, that money back into the team, but you know what I mean? I mean, big decisions to make here. And I just feel like with being, you know, overexerted at work, it really takes away from my ability to work on those things. And in the back of my mind, kind of like you spoke about, whether it's WhosRecords, DMA, guitar too, and that's something I've been slacking on greatly lately. I've been slacking ever since I got the mandolin. I've only played it a couple times, which is a shame. Really excited about that. I want to have more time to do all of these things. So that kind of drives the decision. I guess I should say that drives the introspection of, hey, is this job really giving me the work-life balance that I want? And if the answer to that question is no, you have two roads to go. It's either how do I fix this while staying here, or where do I go next that gives me more of that? I'm starting to get, I think you can tell, I'm starting to get a little bit more of a proactive mindset with my career, both in terms of how I'm spending my time at work, how I'm spending my time in life, and what doors that could open down the road. And I think that that's got to be something that you can relate to because, me being surrounded to like you, Jack, and Inky, you guys have been great influences because you guys talk about things like financial freedom, working for yourself, and I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but like I feel like you have definitely thought about how to make that happen a lot in the last couple of years.
I'm trying to think of the best way to approach this, but it's probably since I left school, it was a huge focus for me. When we were younger, like, I mean, my family was not particularly well off, but also my core motivations were really not in regard to money at all. Like, I didn't really think about it too much in the sense that, like, I kind of just, because this was kind of taught to me or relayed to me subconsciously. I don't know if it was through school, but definitely through my parents somewhat. But if you just, like, go to college and pick a thing, like, you're not going to really have to worry about money because you got your degree and you're going to get paid enough. But I also kind of viewed money with this negative connotation, at least in the sense of it being a driver to do things. Like, you shouldn't just do things for money. And definitely after I left school, my mindset around that really changed, and it kind of highlighted the fact that, without money you can't do all the other things that you care about, and money is really just a proxy for time, for experience, for good food, friendships, all of these things. Like, you can spend money to get time back, you can spend money to have a good meal, you can spend money to go on a trip with friends. It's not the money thing that's evil or bad. But I definitely had that kind of ingrained in me, I guess, when I was younger. And once I was able to move past that and realize that actually I want to have a good life, and to have a good life you do need some money. And then I got a little more ambitious, and I said I want to have a great life, and that requires you to provide a lot of value to the world, which is then compensated to you with money. and it just made me a lot more ambitious in that vein, because I wanted to, like you mentioned, work for myself, so that even when I'm providing value to the world in trade for money, it's still something that I want to do, because as you mentioned before, like working on DMA doesn't feel exhausting. It doesn't feel exhausting in the same way that you know doing hand receipts or filling out account forms or whatever it may be
Or
can be
getting beat up by
exhausting.
clients in a customer service example.
Exactly. And I want to be, because it's possible. We all know that it's possible to do something you enjoy, or at least find satisfying for a living. So it's kind of just been a motivation to get to that point and become competent enough to make it sustainable.
Yeah, and so kind of like the crux of what you're saying is like when, at a younger age you kind of bought into that idea. I feel like it's something that we were always taught probably as young as kindergarten, first grade, like money doesn't buy happiness. And then, you kind of just came to realize like, well, it's correct, and it's not the dollar amount that we see in our bank account that brings happiness to us, but it's what we can do with that. And of course, some people have pretty vain ambitions with, wealth. But obviously, it sounds like you're motivated to do, a lot more with it, and use it to suit a particular lifestyle as opposed to flaunting it, which would be an example of it being used in vain.
And I think, as you mentioned before, like Jack and Inky have definitely been influences on me as well, because they were like that, or at least definitely Jack was before I was, and just being exposed to that more ambitious mindset kind of it definitely pushed me in what I would consider the right direction, in wanting to achieve more, and wanting greater things for myself and the people around me.
Yeah, and honestly, I knew that these guys would come up in conversation, and Jack in particular, and I think that he's got a very different career progression than both of us. I think it's a little bit more standard in terms of, picking, having a decision made sometime in high school, more or less. Again, I don't want to speak for him, but I feel like that was kind of how it was done. And then seeing it through in college and now executing on that with the decisions, I mean, he knew that he was going into a lucrative, field, a lucrative study, and he's excelled at it so far, and he's using it now to propel him onto to new things, and like that's just brilliant execution and a good example of knowing from a young age, but a little bit different than what we talked about, where it's just kind of like, oh, I like animals, I want to be a vet, and I don't mean to bash that train of thought at all. A, it can make you happy. B, you can make money doing it. And C, like I said earlier, it's definitely easier to pick something and stick with it. But I just always admired him because it felt like it was very his decision in terms of what he wanted to go in was very specific and very targeted for the outcome. And now we're already seeing the end result of that. So again, I mean, I hope everything that I just said is accurate. I don't mean to speak for him, but I mean, I don't know if you would agree. I feel like he's kind of had a plan and stuck to it, and it's looking like it's working out pretty well.
Yeah, I think he would describe it as a pretty standard um, path. Besides the fact that he's an above average, um, accomplisher of things. You know what I mean? But the progression has been pretty standard, and I've talked to him, and he's described it that way. And I think what he's going for now is kind of something off the trodden path that's a little more exciting, and that's I think a little bit more on the vein of the financial freedom idea of employing yourself, kind of just finding interesting things and figuring out a way to monetize those passions.
Yeah. So one of the things I was just thinking about when talking about that is like this what motivates you to work and what motivates you to pick a career path because we've kind of talked about two things that I don't know if they have to be independent if they have to be opposite, but we're talking about like one is almost like, just picking a job for the income and for the amount of money. The other is, for how much you like it. And my approach has always kind of been trying to optimize both, which I feel like is pretty in tune with how I make most of my decisions. Like, as somebody who's interested in a lot of different things, I am trying to optimize multiple variables, trying to, that means utilizing my free time as best as possible to have as much of it as I can, to divvy it up in the best way possible between a couple different things. But the point is, like, I'm still kind of going through that. Like, should I be making career decisions based on how much I enjoy the work I do, or should it strictly be, for the income potential? I like to think it should be a combination of both, but maybe that's short-sighted.
Well, I'm actually curious about whether you see kind of these side projects and additional tasks that you picked up at your current job. So things like DMA, things like these video trainings, if you see those as potential career paths, or are they kind of delegated to things I want to do just in my free time?
No, I would definitely say they're delegated to potential career paths, and I would say you nailed the ones that lend themselves to career paths, and the two career paths that I could get out of this are something in, you know, digital, video production, or graphic design, something like that, utilizing the Adobe suite like I talked about earlier, is the springboard for that. And the great thing is, one of the reasons why I want to prioritize more time in DMA, as I talked to you about, really lessening the role and time expenditure in Who's Records right now, is because I think DMA gives me a platform to do those things on top of soccer for fun, right? I mean, at this point, I'm reduced mostly to management, but I have such a good time with the team, and I forget that some of the guys on our team don't know some of the new guys. The Springfield guys don't know some of the guys we've picked up from Southwest Philly, who might be, immigrants from Africa, and other guys that these guys have brought in from playing on a different team. Like, I know everybody and make a point to talk to all of them. And it's really fulfilling, and it's like this great network that I've built through it. So there's a social reward. I love the sport, obviously, even if you might not. Um, so I think it lends itself to a springboard both for those potential career paths, and it could also open up doors to a career within the sport itself, which is equally exciting. So that's, one thing I've thought about, and one thing that was on my mind a lot when I was unemployed, is like, how do you springboard into a certain industry when you don't have background in it? Usually, it's a skill set. You can take that skill set in this industry and use the same skill set in a different industry. The problem that I had was that, like I talked about, my resume being kind of scattered, I did not have one or two specialized skills like graphic design and media production. Um, or I wasn't doing high-end finance operations for a company that I could then bring to somewhere else. So that's why I'm happy with where I'm at right now, in a combination of both the job that I have and also the activities I have on the side. Playing music and stuff would lend itself to that too. I haven't been as invested in that. But where we're at with the soccer team right now, like, we just got promoted to the first division of the competition we're in. It's still amateur, um, but there's super low levels of semi-pro that would probably be the next jump. And it's like, could we go into that? Who do you meet from there when you get into that environment? Does that open doors to monetize this interest and make it a career? So I'm excited in those things for sure. I still think that those are potential careers and or income. I don't know how to monetize running a soccer team. If you saw my balance sheet, you could probably figure that out right away. The spreadsheet that I've kept over the last 2 years I have in this team. Trying to be more aggressive with that stuff. Pick up sponsorships too, which is something I've done. So DMA itself has presented me with a well-rounded background. Picking up sponsorships, running a team. There's obviously the sporting element of it itself, the tactics and coaching side of things. So I would like to devote more time to these. Like I said, like video production, I want to make that a bigger slice of the pie of what I do at work, because that's the thing I'm the most interested in. I don't want to, kind of like you said, you don't want to get deeper into the weeds of event planning because that's not really your forte or your interest. I really need to stop excelling at customer service because that is no fun at all. I think that the next job I go to, I'm going to botch the first customer service situation that I'm in so that they're like, all right, this guy probably shouldn't do that. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, starting to be a little bit more deliberate with how I spend my time with these things.
Is your prioritization part of that deliberation? Do you sit down and think like, it's about to be spring. I'm going to deprioritize guitar and video editing for DMA and athletic recovery, from your injury and stuff, or is it kind of just a passive process as things come up?
Admittedly, I think a lot of these things are pretty passive. But like I've kind of demonstrated so far, I'm spending more time really trying to be introspective with them. And recently, right, again, I mean, as you saw my communication with the Who's Records team, that was clearly the result of some introspection. And in my handy dandy little notepad, uh, I really did like spend some time mapping this stuff out. I think retroactively going with the flow, I just felt like I wasn't really getting enough reward or uh, potential development, personal development out of Who's Records, which I think Inky had kind of gotten to that point too. Maybe some different motivations in there as well for him. Um, so I felt that. I think a lot of the times I have to like emotionally feel something for it to then drive that introspection. But I'm a very analytical person, and it's funny too because when talking about me coming on here, discuss the potential to speak about epiphanies and shifts in perspective and introspection, and I have a lot of those. I still think, admittedly, I don't take the best proactive control over how I spend my time. But at the same time, that goes back to that question I asked, where it's like, do you work for the money or do you work for happiness? And I think my life perspective is largely about always like I want every day to be a good day. There's a way that looks bad. I think there's a way that you can do that incorrectly. I mean, like the Chris Farley method, where every day is just a big party, and there's no foresight to the next day or the future or your older self. That's not really what I'm talking about. But I just want to set myself up where even when I have a bad day at work, I'm still in a good mood because I'm surrounding myself with good people and doing the things I want to do, and I have access to the things that I want to have access to. Um, I think that's all really important for me, and that's where it's like, yes, I'm thinking about the income potential or the career development potential, but it all needs to feel right. Because when it feels off, that's when it really begs that introspection. Like, what am I feeling right now? What's going on? It's like I think I'm using this term correctly from psychology, but it's like when you feel that cognitive dissonance with like how you're feeling and how you think you're setting yourself up to go. That's when it's like, all right, I gotta wheel it back and hit the drawing board and rethink this stuff. And that's kind of exactly what happened when I reached out to you guys about Who's Records.
Yeah, I think you used the term correctly. Definitely cognitive dissonance. Wow, that's hard to say. It's something that I definitely have experienced before. I mean, it's kind of something, at least maybe the past 6 months, I've kind of dealt with in promotion opportunities because I'm in the process of leaving the military, but there's still promotion opportunities for me and incentives to stay in, of course. And it's kind of been this. I know consciously what I want, but you still might have a subconscious pressure or peer pressure or pressure from your colleagues or whatever it may be to do certain things. And I was realizing that, well, why am I going to get so heavily invested, time wise and energy wise, and just from a mentality standpoint into something that I'm not going to really benefit from at all and not going to enjoy. And it's actually part of something else I wanted to bring up, which is monetary compensation, um, as a trade-off for doing stuff you really don't want to do, and like kind of where that line is. Because I could, in this context, promote, and it looks good to the people in the military. The people in the military want you to do that because they want you to invest in what they invest in. But at the end of the day, you're going to be doing more work in a vein that I'm not really interested in. And yeah, I'll get paid more. I'll get financially compensated, but it's something that I've thought about a lot, is not just getting caught in the, oh, well, they're paying me more money, so I'm supposed to do this. Because, like we talked about earlier, like money is not the end goal. The good life is the end goal. And if the job that's getting you the little bit more money makes your life worse, then makes your life worse, and it's not, going to provide a prospective, much better opportunity in the future, then you're kind of just digging the wrong hole.
Yeah. Um, yeah, definitely. I think you can easily lose sight of that though when it comes to promotion opportunity and stuff like that, because it's such gradual and minimal, in some cases negligible, um, steps away from what it is that you want to do or want to be. I think that's probably a pretty common mistake with career progressions at work, especially when you don't have a very proactive approach. Which, by the way, I mean, we're having this conversation. I mean, I think so many of these things we talked about, proactively controlling your career being one of them, especially in the day to day of your job. Maybe not so much. I mean, a lot of people probably think about you know, what major they take and what doors that's going to open. But I think in the day to day, I don't think a lot of people think about the proactive, guidance of their jobs, and what that looks like. To your point, there at least hypotheticals. I don't know if I've had an actual scenario where I've had to think, okay, opportunity to make more money, but I'm doing a lot more of the stuff I don't want to do. A lot of the times, my raises even have come a little retroactively, in the sense that it's like I just organically start doing this task more and more, and then I'm like, oh, wait a sec, like this is now like on my plate. Like I just added a whole new dimension to my job. Like I got to be compensated for this, and I approach it for a raise, and so far I've been pretty successful. That time's coming back around now at Gerhardt's. It's been a while since I've asked for one. We got a bump, just as like kind of an inflation adjustment, which I think is awesome. I mean, it's really great that a small family-owned company does something like that, because I think a lot of them don't. I think that demographic that works for family-owned companies is prone to like getting stagnant, um, in their careers. Perhaps it's very easy to do that. There's not as much opportunity to grow and stuff like that there. So I think a lot of family-owned businesses can get away with not being the ones to suggest a raise and waiting for employees to come get it. Usually I'm just going to come get it anyways, but in fairness to them, they did, step forward and offer that, which I thought was really good. But there have been hypotheticals for sure where I've thought, like, for example, we introduced a client success manager position. So we have a service department, a delivery department, sales. Um, and our sales team is there. What differentiates us from like a Home Depot or Lowe's is the client experience that we provide. So, if you walk into like a Home Depot and you're trying to buy appliances, you might just be talking to some 17-year-old in a paint-stained red vest who doesn't have a lot of insight to give you about these, product options that you have. Obviously, we are doing something very different where you're working with a consultant, on a, first name basis. And likewise, after delivery, if there's a delivery issue, if there's a service issue, you're the one who's going to find out about it. You got to send it over to service or delivery to say, hey, can you help fix this? You send it over to them, and it's kind of a complicated interdepartmental issue, and it falls off the face of the earth. And then this client hits you up a week or two later, and they're like, what's going on? Why haven't I heard from you? And all of a sudden, you're like, oh my God, like this is a big, big mess. So we introduced this client success manager position um, to step into these interdepartmental issues that kept falling off because it was like well, I didn't know what to do. Delivery, it was like not really our fault. So like we didn't know what to do. Introduced this client success manager role to help solve these problems. I knew there was a plan in place to take somebody who was in sales and put them in that role. So that's what I mean when I say hypothetical. Like I knew realistically that wasn't really devised with the intention of floating it out to some of our team members. If that was the case, I would have been one of them. And I would have had a decision to make like, okay, management in my title, which, I mean, that is an interesting conversation in and of itself, right? How much is that really worth? Sometimes it creates more problems than anything having that title. But you get the better title, and you get obviously a pay bump, but like your whole day, every day is solving issues and talking to disgruntled clients. So again, just a hypothetical, but in my mind, the whole time, never really wanted a part of that. Never wanted that raise. I was like, you know what? That promotion, you know what? Even if that was offered me, I'd rather keep doing what I'm doing, kind of working in the shadows, working behind the scenes, having a lot of flexibility. Pros and cons again, but I mean, already we've seen one of the tailwinds being this introduction of video production in my day to day. So wouldn't have gotten that if I took that role. Even if like a good amount of money was floated to me, I don't think I would have taken it.
No, it sounds fairly similar to the position that I've been in the past couple of months, and it's. I think it can definitely, as you mentioned, be easy to get lost um, in those micro adjustments in your workflow from day to day, from people asking you to do things. Or, oh, can you try this? Um, the promotion in the military is a little more uh, stratified, I guess, in the promotion. But the general work that you can be, pushed all the way to left field from right field over the course over time. And in the same way, there's of course in the sense that having manager in your title is an intangible. Um, these promotions to new ranks within the military is a similar thing. Even though, of course, there's a pay bump in both, but a large portion or a significant portion of what's supposed to incentivize you is this status symbol. Um, and you mentioned your employer's proactive inflation adjustment, and I'm curious what you think about employee and employer loyalty. You mentioned it pretty early on in the conversation as something that's kind of old school, but I'm curious what value you see in it, and in the ways that it can flow from an employee to the employer and vice versa.
Gotcha. I think I can speak very well to that from my experience. So, just in the terms of the times that we're in right now, I think there was an old model of loyalty. I think it was a lot more common, a lot more standard for somebody to work for a company for 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, get a pension out of it, be loyal to the employer in the sense that there wasn't really much thought to like going out and getting a better job, going out and leaving and getting a different job just for the pay bump, which is a strategy now. Nowadays, I think there's a lot less loyalty involved in this motivation. I don't know if that has to do with an influx of, corporations and corporate jobs. I don't know if that's even the way we've trended. Um, I think that there's that stagnation that I talk about when you stay at one job, especially when it's a family-owned business where you can be excelling and not have any room to go up. So I would say, generally speaking, I don't think loyalty is worth a ton in this day and age. I think that there are benefits of it for sure. I think in most people's situation, it's probably better to think more independently for your career, what's best for it, and realize that even simply moving for the sake of moving gives you usually, a better opportunity for a better pay bump than you would get if you stayed. I will say though that my situation is different eh, because I'm working for family-owned companies, and I think the reward that I've seen from gaining loyalty as a two-way street, kind of like what you talked about. I think Robertson's was a place that taught me that that could even exist. Because I think if you have a different first job, you might not think that that's achievable. But at Robertson's, there's probably 30 to 40, I'm going to say full-time or main part-time employees. And Flip was the owner. There was, the nickname for whatever, Philip, I guess, but we just called him Flip. And you see him around all the time. So again, that's one of the things that makes us different than a company of 10,000 people. You may never see ownership. Hopefully, you still have some loyalty to your manager in some sense. Some. We can talk about how much you should really have. But in my experience at Robertson's, there was definitely loyalty as a two-way street. The con that I saw from that job might have been pay raise opportunities and again stagnation and a lack of places to move up the ladder. Because at that point you're kind of just waiting for someone above you to leave. But with loyalty, what I gained there and have gained a lot of at Gerhardt's is, I came in and really just worked so hard, very evidently. I actually won Employee of the Year in my first year at Gerhardt's, which I would never say that that was like a reason, like a motivation for me to work like I did. The motivation really was if I can show them that I'm reliable, what I've learned in a work context and in every other context, friendship context too, like if I'm there, if I'm the guy, if I'm reliable, if you can depend on me from a work perspective, from a friendship perspective, usually that's reciprocated. Big red flag if it isn't reciprocated, right? If I'm working for these family-owned companies, if I worked for sleazy or lazy families, greedy families, whatever the case, and that wasn't reciprocated, that would be a huge red flag, and I would be very disinterested in staying there and playing that game. But kudos to the families that I've worked for because I think the loyalty that I've shown to them, I think it has been reciprocated. I think that's why it was such a shock when I left Robertson's to a lot of the people there because it felt like I was very tethered into to the culture there. But that's where the modern day approach eventually took its place, and it was like, okay, I love these people, and like borderline consider them family, um, but it's just not the right career move for me to stay after a certain point.
Yeah, I want to read off a couple of statistics. Um, I did a little research ahead of time in regard to raises and pensions that you mentioned. So the average salary raise when an internal employee asks for a raise is 3%, and the average pay increase when switching employers is anywhere from 5 to 15%, which is a pretty significant well gap, right? And I feel like that's got to lead to some of that in general. Like I'm not speaking about Robertson's or Gerhardt's, but in general, that's got to be a huge, disincentive for loyalty for employees because the longer you stay, and this is a pretty common thing. If you stay at a job for like 10 years, you're pretty much guaranteed to be getting paid like 20% under roughly other people in your position who moved around a couple times, which is just insane to think about because you would think once you get more familiar with the system, more familiar with the people in the market, that the idea, at least the perspective from the company, from the employer, would be to incentivize that person to stay around because their insights are valuable. But I'm not sure where that comes from. As you mentioned before, in the past, it did seem to be a bit more of a, I'll stick with this company for 20, 30 years. In the 1970s, pensions were typically a 30-year, you could call it vestment period. So if you work there for 30 years, you get your pension. and roughly 35% of people had a pension. Now, almost, well, less than 15% of people have a pension. And it's kind of just created, as you mentioned, like a very individualistic job market, right? In the sense that, and I've heard this advice, and I find it very valuable, is you kind of have to treat yourself as an individual contractor for your own career, in the sense that you have to sell yourself well, you have to do what's right for you and what's best for you. That doesn't mean being, negligent or a toxic employee, but making the moves that you need to move, because typically nowadays, unless you're like a federal or maybe a state employee, where they have much higher rates of paying out pensions, but you're just not. I mean, you're not going to get taken care of unless you don't look out for your own retirement, look out for your own career.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you talk about, so basically, like if you stay at a company, you get a 3% raise on average. If you leave a company, go somewhere, whereas if somebody leaves their company and comes into doing the same position as you, they're going to get, that 5 to 15% raise and probably make more money than you. And it is interesting to the points that you talk about because, like, in business school, for example, and from my employers, it's taught so much that retention is so important because of the costs of training and just what happens to everybody else around you when there is somebody going through training. I mean, it's one of the things I do is I train new hires too, and it just derails my entire week because I'm alongside somebody for almost every hour of my day, at least for the first couple of days. So there's such a value to retention. And also, like you said too, like you think you would be better rewarded because you not only are getting better at the position, just like the person who might apply for the job, you know, alongside you, but you've also been with the company longer, so you know the company's framework and operations. You know the personalities of the people around you, and hope. I mean, if you're a good employee and a good person, so to speak, you should be able to get more out of the people around you than a new face. Uh, I believe in that for sure. Like building that trust with people. It's one of the reasons why I can work so well together with a team. Even though I like doing individual work, I can work very well together with a team. I mean, DMA, I guess, is the perfect example, given that I run the team, just because like I can get the best out of people and keep everybody together and on the same page and heading towards the same goal. So for all those reasons, you'd think that the person that stays gets a 10% raise, and we don't look to hire externally, and this person is motivated to stay at their company for their 10% raise. And I guess the only reason that doesn't happen is because like you've just got it would just create like a wage inflation in and of itself. And I think the only way you could balance that is if somebody, this could actually be an effective concept, is if somebody can get those 5% raises from staying, but a new hire who starts behind them has to start where they started. I just get the sense that that's not typically how it works, and they see them moving the bar of that position up and thinking like, well, if we bring a new hire and he's got to make something relative to what this person's making, and that's probably why it doesn't really allow. I mean, I'm sure there's also balance sheet reasons why you can't just hand everybody 5% raises, but like you said, I mean, it's unfortunate. I think pensions were probably the saving grace before, but we learned in our risk management class at Temple, which that was a brilliant program. That's something that I do kind of wish I maybe studied. It lends itself to actuarial science and stuff like that. They, I think Temple also kind of pioneered that study, or at least they claim that. But they talked about how pensions are like a really, really like, massively expensive benefit to offer, and that's why companies get away from it. Is because the amount you make post retirement is based on how long you served there, and then it's paid, in most cases until you die. And with life expectancy going up, that's another reason. That's another element that makes it even more expensive. Um, so, so yeah, I don't know. It's a shame. I think that loyalty financially, to all the points you just made, numerically and objectively, doesn't really reward itself. I think the reason why anybody would choose to stay loyal is probably comfort, and that's something I saw at Robertson's for sure. Their mainstays, like I mentioned earlier, had been there for 20 or 30 years. And they're like they're like they're going to be buried there. You know, like they're part of the foundation of the building. And I have a tremendous respect for people with those loyalties, but you know, me and my one of my other coworkers who's close to my age there would talk about that, and we would hear stories about like wages being stagnant and stuff like that. And it's a grueling industry, like I mentioned, like feast or famine. Like there were weeks where we were turning out 60, 70, 75 hour weeks, you know, 3 days in a row working 14-hour shifts. Or longer. It's just like a wake up, go to work, come home, run it back for 3 or 4 days. I worked like 19 or 21 days in a row there before. And I used to like pride myself in that stuff. And now I think because of being surrounded by people like you guys, now I'm a little less gung ho about being like, yeah, I'm such a hard worker. And I'm more like, wow, like what am I doing? Like nobody else is doing that and they're making just as much money if not more. What's the reward, you know?
Yeah, I think, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I think that if it's for your own project, then that's the reward, right? Obviously, in the case of Robertson's, you know, you're kind of working on what I would imagine to you these events and stuff is kind of just, it's just the work that you happen to be doing. If it happened to be a different task, it happened to be a different task. But if it was something like DMA or something like that, and you're, you know, working 70-hour weeks on something along those lines and seeing the fruits of the labor there, then I think there would probably be innate satisfaction. In the same way that the owner or your uh, the owner's son or whoever you may have worked with probably saw those 70-hour weeks differently than an employee because they're bought in differently.
Yeah, the owner's son was the other like leadership ownership figure there, who I think at this point is basically the owner. I mean, I think he's running the show now. Another great person too, someone that I always really enjoyed working with. And that's great food for thought, I think, because we talk about certain tasks at our jobs. My example being the video production side. I've been thinking about that too. Like, I kind of hate working anything over 40 hours, 45 hours, especially since I went to salary. Um, but to the point that you made, and that obviously does need to, you know, your wage, your salary, whatever the case, should reflect the amount of work you do. If you're working so many hours on salary, then it's like, well, we got to bump the number up. But you know, as long as that balance is in place, just in terms of the workload, I have tried to tell myself like, hey, if you're gonna add extra hours to your week, but it's for a project that you can get off the ground, I mean, that probably is worth something. And we so we're making like training videos, but they're for our sales team, and we want to put them on social media too. We're highlighting products. We call them Focus Model Friday, and so our inspiration slash competition for this is a company called Yale Appliance, who has a really robust training platform, or at least like YouTube channel where they discuss these products. And credit to them, theirs is very open. It's comparing these machines and talking about pros and cons. It's kind of interesting though because they also sell the appliances, so you know I can't imagine what like a manufacturer would think when they see something and they're like, all right, well this company just like openly, you know, promoted one product over ours. It's going to hurt their relationship potentially. Ours is just kind of sales focused, and again for our team, we're highlighting the selling features, and for clients as well, we're highlighting the features that you'd want to buy. And Yale again is a pretty robust. I mean, they're getting thousands of views on all of their videos, which I mean, appliance is pretty niche. So all of your videos where you're comparing a Miele versus a Bosch benchmark dishwasher, if for that to get 9,000 views is like, yeah, they're the leaders in that space. Like conversely, we could be the leader. DMA could be the leaders in the amateur soccer space if we hit like 10,000 followers, that would be like competing with low level professional teams. I'm talking like low level, like in England and like fourth, fifth division professional teams, maybe like sixth, seventh division in England, but like you'd be competing with low level professional teams at that point. So at work, there is potentially a motivation to build something, and that would help a portfolio so much. So I think that would be a good justification to put that kind of time and energy in. But of course, too, I mean, you still got to make sure you're getting compensated for it, or you better use it as a springboard to get more money down the road, I would say.
Yeah. You mentioned the, not wanting to work more than, well, 40 hours a week typically, I would imagine. And, that kind of reflects on the respect that an employer has for your time or for an employee's time in general. What kind of incentives outside of monetary compensation, what are the important things you think that an employer can offer you as an employee
Outside of compensation?
outside of monetary compensation? Yeah.
So that's a good question, and that's something that I wanted to elaborate on when talking about loyalty. I don't think I did that enough justice because I think the loyalty that I have with, let's say, my boss, who again is great. Like the way I talked about him earlier should paint the picture of someone who is he's only 33 or 34. He's not much older than us, right? So he very much has that modern day employee mindset. Like he understands a lot of these concepts. I've moaned to him about how for a while I was going into the office 5 days a week when, everybody who works in an office these days has some amount of hybrid flexibility. And I've started to push that envelope and see a little bit of progress there. I think that's an example of something that loyalty can give you, something that a kickback, so to speak, where your hard work and efforts can be rewarded in ways other than a dollar value. And another good example of that that also has to do with scheduling is even a week where I'm working 44 hours, which is a decent amount, especially when you got to go into the office 4 or 5 days a week. I think even in that situation, there's, not, I'm going to say not every hour is created equally. So what I love about it, as we've discussed, like we have uh, other motives and projects, and DMA is a good example again. Every once in a while, we may have a weeknight game. Say I have a Wednesday night game at 7. Say we are in a time of year where the showroom's open until 7 on a Wednesday night, and like a showroom's somebody called out, we need someone to close it. I would sometimes volunteer to just stay that extra hour and go to the and leave and go to the showroom to close it because it just needs to be done. And I'll put in the hard work where and when I can to get a kickback so that in a different situation when that might happen, I'm not thrown into the fire, without a choice because I've got something else I want to do. And that's something I learned at Robertson's. Again, credit to the family. It's like they took notice of who put in extra work when it needed to be done and would give him a kickback sometimes. And for me right now, I'll work till 10, 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday night. Some days it basically ends up being like a 13-hour day, which that's for the record, when I talk about like 8 hour, 9 hour, 13-hour day, like it's not like certain other jobs. Like I'm usually occupied the whole time for the most part. I mean, yeah, like yes, I'm a human. I use the bathroom. I get lunch. Like I get my lunch out of the fridge, put it in the microwave. I maybe have a side conversation with someone, but it's very much like very active the whole time. But I do that because a lot of times if I'm caught up, I can leave at 3 o'clock or earlier on a Friday. And my boss trusts me because when I'm not caught up, I'll stay. But if I tell him I'm caught up and we're in a good spot, he might let me leave at 12:30. And when I talk about not all hours being built the same, basically you just bought yourself a free half day, you know? Now, yeah, you grinded for it during the week, you put the hours in elsewhere, but it was convenient for me to do it another way, and they let me do that. Whereas other people in the sales team, sales consultants, they work shift-based jobs. I am not built for that. Like, I don't want my day and all of the activities that I'm doing to revolve around an arbitrary clock in and clock out point. I want it to be determined based on the work that I have to do and how I can fit it into the rest of my life. that's a great kickback that I've had with these jobs and the flexibility they've given me.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. The flexibility overall of just being able to having that relationship with your boss to be able to say, okay, I can put in the hours here, I can't do it here, and them being able to acknowledge that and not having kind of the um, more corporate sense of like you're just going to clock in and clock out regardless. There's not that level of understanding that you're a human. You're kind of just a worker bee. Something else that I wanted to touch on was leadership, because you're running DMA, you're running the soccer team and the Instagram, and I imagine some other aspects of the team as well. Yeah, um, and especially people for around our age, leadership is something they're probably coming into more recently, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe it'll happen in a couple of years. But I'm curious how you're, I guess, how you've taken on the mantle of leadership in this way, and what you think about it, and if it's something that you find satisfying in a different way than, say, video editing. Yeah, just the leadership aspect of things that you're doing in a teaching way, in bringing people together, running the team, organizing.
So first off, funny. I just want to say, like, as a testament to that, and you talk about the soccer team, and unfortunately, like, it is very much solely run by myself. I mean, no disrespect to like Lecce, one of the two people I started the team with. He helps me when he can, but like, I just have such a good grasp on running this stuff and managing people. So much so that like when our Sunday league captain told us that like some of the guys on Sunday league are a little bit older. He's like 35. They had their first kid. He was already busy with work and not really playing much. And he was like, guys, like I can't even stay involved with this. Like I need someone else to run this. I basically got nominated to run the team while I was like freshly out on injury. And I was kind of like, guys, what the hell? Like I'm not even playing right now. Like you're telling me none of you can do this, but I mean, we slid it into the structure that we already had with the Saturday team that plays in Casa, and it's worked really well. In terms of like leadership as a trait, I like that that's part of, I guess, like my character. Um, I like a lot. I've always respected that. I've like so like I'm obviously a massive sports fan. I can't believe outside of like running the team, I haven't like alluded to that or made metaphors to that. I know you have a sports background too, specifically with football. But like team captains and their personas have always really spoken to me. Um, and I think like even when we are playing pickup soccer and it's just like 12 of us just kind of casually going out there to the field, it's like I'm just kind of like barking at guys, like I specifically like almost like it's a practice. Like, if you see a cone, if you see a penny, if you see a ball, like grab it. You just like having the wherewithal to like say that to people. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that kind of communication. Clearly, I mean, I'm not. Otherwise, I wouldn't run what's basically a soccer club at this point because we have multiple teams playing in multiple competitions. But like, I like that. I like being able to like get. I mean, in a less altruistic perspective, it's satisfying being able to get a certain behavior out of people. But I mean, in a team environment, you're all working towards the same thing. And I mean, in a soccer perspective, like when we started the team, I wasn't one of the better players, and now we've obviously climbed the ranks, and every time we have turnover, we bring in better players. So now I'm definitely not one of the better players. But you can kind of compensate for that with leadership. It's like call it like the middle management trait or gene, which like I don't know, maybe I feel like that can be talked about in a negative light at work sometimes. But I like being considered a leader. I don't think I've ever like aspired to be that. I've never again proactively said I need to work on this. Um, I think my dad actually does a lot. I don't know if you've ever seen that out of him, but like in a lot of ways in his life, has those same traits as well, in terms of leadership and running things. And sometimes too, the leadership element can you can take people and things of varied skill sets and skill sets of your own, and leadership allows you to put them all together. I think I can't help but do that sometimes. I wish I could help but do that. Like I'm now so ingrained in leading this team that I'm like, shoot, like I've like boxed everyone else out from leading this because I've just taken so much ownership of it. But another good example would be like, our band, which really, we haven't been playing together much lately, and I am I could probably be a better impetus to make more of that happen and us play more. But that's my point is like, I mean, like Tim and Kyle, for instance, are fantastic musicians. Meanwhile, I have like 3 years of self-taught experience. But when we are involved, like I'm taking the leadership, like when we are practicing, if we have a show coming up, a house party coming up, like I will lead the communication in the group chat in terms of when we're going to play and scheduling it. I'll lead in person to say, hey, what do you guys think? Like, I thought that sounded a little off. Like, I don't know. Sometimes people are just like scared to speak up, scared to make a suggestion that might better everybody, scared to put their thoughts out there where somebody might disagree with them. And I would say that that's almost my best trait that I've developed over the last couple of years is like I'm at a point now where it's like I'm comfortable with a little bit of conflict, a little bit of disagreement. I'm comfortable with putting my ideas out there and them not being received or taken to. I mean, it is what it is, but you just got to start the conversation somewhere and help it get to the finish line. Doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong in that sense. So, it's a trait that I admire. I wouldn't say it's a trait that I've like proactively sought out.
Yeah, I think that I have definitely noticed um, that kind of behavior and initiative in you and communicating with you, especially over the last couple of years. Not to say that you really weren't like that before, but I mean, we've been friends a long time, and you see the way that people develop over time, and I've definitely seen that as part of you, and I'm curious how you think being thrust into these leadership positions, like you said, you were nominated essentially for leading the club, has affected the other areas of your life. I know you mentioned the band, but like, being a leader kind of gives you a different perspective on productivity and excuses and different things from other people when before you know, we were at the bottom of the totem pole. We were the smallest fish in the pond. So I'm curious how those perspectives have shaped like you as an employee or you as a friend or, different aspects.
It's so I think it's such a timely question. I think a lot of this conversation is like so um, topical in my life right now. And again, that like introspection that I had with Who's Records, I think was an amalgamation of all these thoughts. And I think that like the leadership element, right? I mean, it was like, I mean, I took over Who's Records, you know what I mean? Because Inky kind of abruptly, abandoned that
Yeah.
on us. Which is fine because he was doing most of the work on it. I mean, it was mainly his project, to be fair. But I don't think like it was so abrupt, and I don't think that we were ready to be done with it. Like I've had a lot of fun doing it, um, and I still love talking music with you guys, and like we should continue to listen to albums and talk about them. You know what I mean? But it was like, the expectation to organize, right? Organization, scheduling, these are all things that come with leadership, and there was the expectation to organize and schedule and produce that and the soccer team. And there's less of an expectation of that with us playing music, but I'm good at making things happen. So if I want to make that happen and they're kind of whispering about it, then I feel like I got to bring that together. And more strenuous than any of this is probably work because when I talk about like leading the scheduling of trainings, I basically communicate with our brand reps that are of value to us at a certain time, like grill season's coming up. We want to do a Weber training in our showroom. So I'm reaching out to the Weber rep saying what date works for you. We pick a date as I'm looking through the schedules. Now I got to roster it. I got to talk to showroom managers and say, all right, like who can I steal from your showroom at this time? I put it early in the morning, so it's not going to affect your coverage. Who can I pull for that hour and a half from your store so we can make it to training? Because brand reps, if they're going to come out, they want bodies to be there to train. Now I'm trying to pull these associates out, and a good associate should want to go to training, right, and better themselves and be more prepared to sell. But realistically, you get people who are like, I don't want to sit through training. It feels like high school. It's like, dude, I need you to come out. And it's like all of this communication, and then you line everything up perfectly, and then the guy is like telling you or not telling you in the morning that he's not going to make it. And someone else is trying to get out of it because they hit traffic. It's like, I don't care that you hit traffic. Like I did everything to tell you to be here on time so we could get this done and over with quickly and make it less painful for everyone. And now you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And so work in particular, but everything else, that leadership element almost was leading to a little bit of burnout because it's just so much communication. The team, like guys don't speak up in the group chat. Now I'm texting 10 different individuals. Yo, are you playing this weekend? Hey, where are your league fees at? Like, if you can't pay them right now, then tell me when you're going to pay them. Because if you ghost me, this is something I've learned. It's like if you ghost me, like I'm not going to play you. You're not really going to be a part of the team. Like I can't lose money. I've given guys the benefit of the doubt, and then you just get burned and you lose money. But man, all that communication. I mean, it's the reason why I keep my phone on do not disturb all the time because it's like if I didn't, it would be buzzing very often. Subtle flex, popular guy. But it would be buzzing all the time, and I would just my whole life would just be responding to the stimulus of my phone, and I don't want that. So it can be burdensome at times, for sure. But I do enjoy it.
Have you had any um, of those epiphanies or realizations in regards to certain styles of leadership or things that didn't work, um, and now you've kind of, I guess, integrated into the way that you do things?
So for one, I think I've definitely already alluded to the fact that there's no like Machiavellian principles in the way I'm running things. You know what I mean? Like, it's very much a belief that like I'm the good cop. You know what I mean? Like we are gonna have a good time. We're like, and my personality, like I get along with most people that I cross paths with. I kind of make that a point. Altruistically, it's just better for everybody. It's more fun. There's no conflict. And then from the palpable kind of benefits of that is that you can get what you wanted. So that's what the benefit of networking is like exposure to, I've got a plug in this industry that can hook me up with this. And I mean, that sounded like a drug reference, but that's not what I mean. It's like, it's like how, it's like how family members of mine can use me as somebody to buy, appliances from at a very discounted price because I give them the family discount. Um, so there's that benefit to networking and doing things in like a wholesome kind of like let's in a kumbaya kind of way where we're all getting along here and we're all playing for the same team. The things that I've learned to do better are just be more assertive, speak up, and just get more comfortable with conflict and having to call people out sometimes. Um, and honestly, like I've had tough conversations in all of these positions, and like with DMA, I was in a sticky spot last night because we had a kid who's a really good goalie. He came into the team last season when Ben, Springfield kid, moved at the very end of the season. Brendan had been our kind of reserve when he was available when we needed him. He came in. I was bugging him to play full time for us the next season because I don't know any other goalie. You're a really good goalie. Like just like you've been coming out for us. Can you play full time? First, he was like, I'm kind of stretched thin with other leagues. He then told us he would play, and then Mike found another goalie from a team that we picked up a bunch of other players from because they folded this year. Supposedly, he's an exceptional goalie, potentially better than this guy, Brendan. The new guy Connor is so pumped to play. He's like, I'll even come out and like just like be a guest the first couple of weeks till I get my chance. Which I was like, oh wow, like this guy's a really good goalie. I thought he was gonna be. I gotta play every week. Like I'm not trying to pay league fee. Kid paid league fees before like almost everybody else on the team, and he doesn't even know how much he's gonna play. You know, so I'm like, I love this energy, and supposedly he's really really good. So there's some motivation to like, do I do I make him the starter? But that's so hard because Brendan just told like it sounds like per my conversation with him last night, he actually opted to not play in one or two other leagues so he could play with us. So then it's like you find that out and you're like, well, now I feel like I got to be fair to him. I'm not trying to, again, good cop. I'm not trying to burn any bridges. This is not like this is friends playing amateur soccer. Like, I'm not trying to burn bridges and kick friends out of the club and stuff like that because somebody else could be better. But yeah, so basically, right, with that, with this whole issue, like, I approached Brendan last night. I was hoping to do it at a game this past weekend. It would have been a much easier conversation to have in person. It's something we talk about in sales too when we're hiring, like for this online sales position that we have open right now. It's like when you can see, you know, body language and the immediate feedback on someone's face and body language, you can get a point across better. It can obviously be hard to get certain things across through text, but we didn't have the game last weekend because of weather and some other factors. It was just a scrimmage, so it just got called off. But I wanted to talk to him about this because the other goal, the new goalie Connor, was really pushing me forward. So last night I text Brendan, and it started off with like a quick question, and then I sent him a long text because I was trying to like make it clear to him. I thought that I was getting a sense when I asked him last season, at the end of the season, that he was afraid he was going to be spread too thin to play full time for us because he had so many other leagues that he was in. So I was saying to him, I was like, I have someone else who's interested. So if you feel like this is like burdensome and you're stretched too thin, I have someone else. And you can kind of be the reserve, the second choice, the backup when he's out, when he's hurt, whatever, away on travel. But I had to make it clear, like it was so hard to make it clear to him that I wasn't hopeful that he would say, "Oh yeah, I'll step aside," or that I wasn't insinuating to him like, "Yeah, like we don't really like you're kind of the second choice now." You know what I mean? You're old news now. So it was hard, but communication has always been a strength of mine. So I've kind of gotten good at putting those tough conversations out there, whether in person, which can be tough sometimes in a different way because it's like you gotta just seize the opportunity when he's leaving the game or something like that. Be like, "Yo, dude, can you have a sec?" Asking for a raise can be like that too sometimes, where you gotta just like grab him and be like, "Yo, can I talk to you real quick?" Um, but also putting that stuff into words and just having those tough conversations in general. I'm sure I have plenty of other examples of tough conversations, but I mean, if 2 minutes of awkwardness and discomfort, or 10 minutes even, about like going back to work, right? If a 10-minute conversation is difficult, but it's about your raise, your standard of living at the job, then that 10 minutes of discomfort is 100% worth whatever better outcome you're going to get from it. So you shouldn't kind of shy away from it because it's awkward. Like you just got to have it. You just got to do it and grin and bear it for those 10 minutes, whatever it is, and everything's going to be better after that.
Yeah, I mean, biting the bullet, sacrificing that little bit of time for the greater payoff in the future. One experience or one, I guess, realization that I've had through experience of leadership is aligns with things that I've talked about before on the show, but also talked about with you outside. And just having, not giving yourself excuses for things. And especially in leadership, because so many things come down to you initiating something, being the catalyst for really anything to happen a lot of the time, unless you're lucky enough to have, other leaders on your team or in whatever context this is. But, there was this time when I was in charge of, I have roughly 8 people that I am in charge of, depending on any given month. And, I was responsible for making sure that they showed up to, I don't even remember what it was at this point, but showing up to like some training or they had some task that they had to accomplish. And, at the time, it was early on in my leadership journey, I guess we could call it. And, I told them ahead of time, like probably a week in advance, and I texted them probably like the night, I think it was the night before, and then they just didn't show up the next day. And I'm sure you've been there, been in a similar situation, and it's extremely frustrating. And then a slightly more experienced leader was just, I explained to him what happened, and he was just like, at the end of the day, like, you just have to make sure that they're there. And I guess it's probably a little bit different in a normal employee or corporate circumstance than the military, but it kind of just reflected on me, or I interpreted it in a slightly different way and took it a bit further, and just kind of told myself, it's not my job to tell them, right? And not in the sense that it's not my job to, it's like, oh, it's not my job, it's not my fault, like I told them what to do and they didn't show up. But in the sense, literally, it's not my job to tell them to show up. It's my job to have them show up, in this specific circumstance. And if that means I have to tell them a week before, and I have to tell them the day of, and I have to text them that morning so that they show up, it's still on me to make them show up. Of course, it's in a more literal sense, it's their fault. But if I want the result, if I want the outcome that I want, and at the end of the day, if I'm working on a personal project, especially, like, that is what I want. In this case, sure, it was an organizational task that I don't have a huge buy-in to, but just conceptually having that in my mind, that if I want the result, it really doesn't matter if at the end of the day they don't show up, and I can say, well, I told them it's not my fault, like it's on them. Because I as I said, it's not my job to check the box so that I can say I checked the box. That my job is to make sure that what needs to happen happens.
Yeah, I mean, that example is definitely a frustrating one for you to be in because it's like, I mean, you did do what should have elicited the correct, reaction and response from your team. But yeah, I mean, that's like the same thing I'm dealing with these trainings right now, where it's like I put it in a month in advance just to save the date, and then like 2 weeks out, I put the roster on there, and then 1 week out, I send it again with the roster on there, and then the day before, I send an email to the 5 people attending saying where it's at, what time, you know what I mean? All the while, I've already checked with the store managers to make sure that it works on their schedule. They're not going to be short in the showroom. In some instances, they might have enough people where somebody could call out from the showroom, and this person that I've assigned can still go to training because they've still got enough people in the showroom. You know what I mean? And it's like I do all of that, and they still don't come. And that's where, to be honest with you, that's where in that situation I might be like, and with training, it's flexible enough where we can fudge it. I mean, it's like the rep's not going to be like, I counted 5 people and you only sent 4. You know what I mean? It's just managing relationships. It's kind of ambiguous. Also, it reflects worse on the person who didn't attend because they are a sales associate. They should be there for their own sake. In that situation, I would definitely be a little indignant if somebody gave me an ultra hard time because it's like, I don't know how much more I need to spoon feed this individual. But yes, you are correct. I mean, it's like it's not about like checking the box and going through the motions. And I think a good way to like demonstrate that with your situation is like if that system worked 50% of the time, like that was a repeated incident where you followed that step and it didn't quite get the job done most of the time. Like the success rate was again only 50%, maybe not 90, 95, where it looks worse on the individual when it's like that method that's not working, that's where you could turn around and say, but I mean, I told them, I've been telling them, I checked the box. But that's where it's like, all right, this method isn't working. Like I need to do something. Because again, it's not really based on, this is what we've talked about. It's not really based on like the input. It's based on the outcome, right? So it's like, yes, you did a task that does make sense. You could say you checked the box, but the outcome has repeatedly not been sufficient. And so this is where I go back to sports. This is what you and I talked about before, where it's like, you know, I'm going to use like soccer practice as an example because I always credit Mr. Meter, our video production teacher. I took a bunch of his classes, and he was our soccer coach. I always credit him with kind of really pounding this I ideology in my head because it's like I could turn up to practice and just have a shitty practice like 2 days in a row. You know what I mean? And just be like, well, I'm just slammed with schoolwork right now, like so tired, been going through some kind of like sickness, like I'm not sleeping enough, so it's like, yeah, I'm showing up, I'm a little rusty. He's got to pick his team for game day based on who's been looking the best in games and in practice. And if I, at the end of the day, don't look like I'm one of the best 11 players to give us the best chance of winning, he's not going to say, well, there's a player who's better than him, but he's dealing with all this stuff. So it's like, yeah, you know, he's got more of a right to be in the team. No, all he's looking at is the output, and he's saying, no, Seamus, like fair, like a legitimate excuse, something you and I have talked about, like that's a legitimate obstacle. But this guy's still delivering better, so I'm going to play him. Even more applicable to pro sports than to high school sports too, obviously, where it's like you could have the most traumatic thing happen in your life, but it's like if there's a guy who's going to perform better than you, man, there's millions of dollars on the line here, so we're going to play him. And that's where all these brilliant stories about athletes and their, resolve come from in so many instances. It's like they dealt with all that adversity and still were one of the best 11 to get in the team, to get in the national team and play in the World Cup. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, I think in this instance there are checking the boxes. There's legitimate excuses, but successful leaders are just going to focus on the outcome and making sure successful in different walks of business. I would say sales is another good example where it's like, yeah, you might have lost some clients, find some new ones. At the end of the day, like your numbers need to be higher than they were last year. And good leaders, well motivated people, find a way to make that happen.
Yeah, I think the analogy with sales personnel is perfect because it's like it doesn't matter if you made 100 calls if you made 0 sales. As you mentioned, like it's not the input. It's not checking the box. It's the outcome. And as much as we could talk about this, especially in the context of working for someone else or working for a corporation or a family business or the military, and we haven't gotten to this part yet, but at least if you have personal ventures, then your driving force at the end of the day is the outcome. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but like it's just so much more obvious when it's your own goal at stake instead of a goal that's handed to you from your organization. That like I don't care if my computer's giving me a headache, if I need to put this episode out, and I've given myself a due date of 6 a.m. on Monday. It simply doesn't matter if it's my computer is crap in the bed at 12 a.m. on Monday. Like I'm still going to complete working on it, and that extends to your leadership when you're working with other people. When I'm working with a photographer or a musician or a guest on the podcast, like whatever needs to happen, I'm going to facilitate that because that's the outcome that I want, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if you were heading there, but that's something that we've talked about before, where it's like the approach to your personal endeavors, um, and treating them like a profession, right? I mean, am I stealing the words out of your mouth, basically?
I mean, they're good words. I'll take credit for them.
Yeah. We've talked about that before, and it's something that I could maybe do better with, but that's part of the struggle that I've been having is that I couldn't find a way to make DMA and WhosRecords both feel like work. And yeah, I mean, again, like DMA just lends itself so much to everything I'm trying to do. Plus, I have it down pat a lot better already, and there's that like collective team bond behind it where there's just so many guys I talk to in the course of a week between the guys on our Saturday team, Sunday team, Tuesday team, and the guest players, the guys we're playing pickup with on the weekends in the off season, like so many friends that have come from it and stuff. And then you talk about deadlines too, and there are some natural deadlines in with the MA, right? Like so, again, it's kind of arbitrary. I'm not getting paid to do it, and there's no reason that a team at our level needs to put like a lineup post out on social media. But I really like the way our Instagram looks, and I like treating it with that degree of I'm going to call it enthusiasm instead of professionalism. Because again, there's no need for a team at our level to like try to be, you know, or pretend to be a pro Premier League team. But it's just creates a good product, and there's definitely some good things that come from that. And I think if we get a bunch of followers because it looks good, then that's more leverage for me to get sponsorship. And these games are on Saturdays at set times, so Friday night is kind of my deadline to put the lineup post out there. And there are some other deadlines that maybe aren't as strict, because obviously it doesn't make sense to put a lineup post out 2 days after the game. Not a ton of sense. So that's a pretty hard imaginary deadline. There are some other instances where there are maybe projects that don't have a deadline, but I want to get them done at a certain point so I can move on to something else that might have align with our timeline a little better. So I think I can treat those as a profession or with a professional attitude a little bit easier. And I want to be at that spot. That's kind of why I want to focus on it, because that's something that you've talked about that I want to embody with it too. Is like, without burning out, without doing more than I have to, but just like purely wanting to approach it that way because it's something I care about, which I feel like kind of ties this whole thing together that we've talked about, where my approach is to satisfy myself, really. I mean, whether it's using a career as a vehicle for income to satisfy ambitions, or if it's the ambitions themselves, or the work from the career. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that money is a vehicle to happiness, for sure. But like we said, it's not about the money. So I want everything that I do to serve kind of myself, my ambitions, and my happiness. So that's kind of the motivation to get to work or to go to work on something like DMA.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things there that I want to pinpoint. The first one is kind of setting your own due dates, and this is something I just started doing this week. And I kind of did it on accident because I was talking. I forget who I was talking to, but I said that something was due. And that's a common phrase. When you have homework or you have an assignment or you have a work project, you say it's due this day. But when I said it, it was kind of a Freudian slip in a sense, because I wasn't thinking of it necessarily in that sense. But I was talking about something to do with the podcast. And after I said it, I was reflecting on it later in the day, and I just figure it's a better mentality, and it's already kind of an ingrained habit or mindset to treat things with a due date differently, even if that due date is set by yourself. So I happen to say like, oh, I have to edit this video, it's due Monday, and this person asked me like, what do you mean it's due? And I was like, well, that's when I've decided to put it out, and I'm going to hold to my own due date more than I'm going to hold to anyone else's due date. It's kind of just we alluded to before, it's just one of these perspective changes where it's like, well, whose goals am I going to take more seriously than my own? Even if they're small things. And the other part of that is the professionalism that we've talked about before and that you brought up. And it's just kind of you're going to be a professional at whatever you treat as a profession. It's not going to just hit you one day that you're all of a sudden you're treating things like a professional would. It's like you can accidentally slide into the habits of a professional, but if you decide for yourself, I'm going to treat this as I would treat any other um, job opportunity, then that's that's how you're going to treat it. You know, you've decided to be a professional at your job. You've decided to turn in tasks on time and to communicate efficiently, effectively, and respectively. But those were decisions. It's not like it's a mandatory thing that just like a switch you turn on in a physical sense. Like it's a choice that you turn that on. And if you know, we as people can turn that on for the things that, you know, we're truly passionate about, we truly want to work on, then, you know, it's only going to pay off. You don't want to do a disservice to your own goals and treat them as if they're the projects of an amateur when you don't want them to be that way.
Yeah, I definitely commend your, I don't know if it's a testament to discipline and dedication, or what it is. It's probably those things exactly, but I definitely commend your discipline to uphold, self-made deadlines and goals like that. Um, I can be the same way a lot of the time, but I mean, and maybe this is an excuse, but that's where either the lack of proactive um, decision making with this stuff, or the work-life balance comes in where it's like I can be a little bit more lenient with myself. The positive spin I put on that is because there's just truly so many things that I'm interested in, and I think you would agree with that. I mean, you mentioned it briefly earlier, but like for a long time I was dealing I mean, kind of still really, and so for the past like 16 months I've been dealing with an injury recovery, and then there's also just like general like fitness and health upkeep and not getting to the gym as much as I'd like to, cooking healthy food and cooking good tasting food. I mean, like all of these things. I'm gonna do all these things. Unemployment was so much fun because I got to just imagine a life where I let like my interests dictate what I do all the time. And I think that's kind of like you get to experience that. And I think that more so than anything I've learned from these jobs that I've held, I think has been one of the biggest teaching moments where it's like, oh, this is the ideal thing to strive for. You know what I mean? Not sub 40-hour weeks or half day Fridays. Like, oh, this freedom, that's probably what I should be striving for. So I think from there you can kind of erect a plan, to get there. For me, again, admittedly, it's not a well thought out plan with like, expectations and at the end of this year, at the end of 3 years, at the end of, by the time I hit 30 and et cetera. But I'm always taking a temperature check and self-reflecting and making sure that I am heading in the right direction. And that's where that emotive part of it, that feel part of it is really important for me because again, I mean, as long as I'm in a good mental health, I believe that everything's going to be fine.
What does that success look like to you long term? You know, the kind of glimpse you got from your gap in employment.
Yeah, I mean, so at a basic level, I would say just achieving a work-life balance where I'm spending a lot more time and energy and motivation with personal pursuits. I'm hoping to kind of whittle those personal pursuits down to a more logical and practical balance. Um, you know what I mean? Where there's enough exercise in there to stay healthy. There's enough expenditure in DMA to turn it into what I want it to be, which again is still kind of figuring that out because I don't really know, exactly what you can do with a amateur team and do we excel to a new level of play? Do I use it as a springboard into something else as a career? Um, I think I'm still working through that stuff. Um, and I think that um, I think I'll get to a more solidified answer, but that's kind of where I come back to that whole thing where it's like I just kind of have to feel it out and analyze what makes the most sense for all of these things and optimize all of these hobbies in the way that makes most sense. But to give you a more direct answer, I would say this. I've had written down on my notepad here for like the last hour, um, different like motivating factors. And when I say motivating factors, I guess I should say like criteria, maybe like like what different criteria people use for success. Because I think like you can apply to career, you can apply to life. Um, Success can be defined differently by different people. And I think that some people are looking for objective measures. They're like the resume achievers. And those are the type of people that I feel like have always kind of pursued jobs and spoken about jobs in their career in a way that like really paints this beautiful resume. And that's kind of what they're striving for. And there are like objective qualities to that. Like you held this position at this large firm, you oversaw this department or governing board and were responsible for all of these decisions. Like that's objective. That's what resumes are meant for, is to like objectively demonstrate what you've done and achieved and the awards that you've won and stuff like that. Um, Similarly, sometimes I feel like people talk about travel, where it's like a list, like just shooting a list out of everywhere they went. But other people are looking to get different things from that, from those travel experiences. So to bring that to like a career, right? Some people are going for the objective kind of look at all the things I've done. I felt like a lot of professors at Temple spoke to us about their qualifications on the first day of class, very much in that sense, like talking about all these big prestigious organizations that they've worked for, which fair enough. Again, no one can take that away from you. It's objective. It's something that you can look back on your deathbed and be like, oh, this is what my career and my life looked like. Um, Status and wealth, and I think that's another thing that people may strive for and use as the basis for certain decisions. Is like, what kind of status does this grant me? Which again, like from a career, from a resume, we're talking about like the job title. You know what I mean? Um, Status in that sense, wealth in terms of the status symbols that it can provide, the things you can buy with that. Um, and then I think there's just kind of that more like, um, almost like I would refer to it almost as like an enlightened approach, where it's just like, just happy in your day to day. Not to, and not to be corny with that, because again, we've talked about how ambition and money can help you achieve those things, and I think that it's important to pursue those. Um, but at the end of the day, like I'm not really making these decisions based on what's going to produce the best looking resume, or even give me the highest status in the eyes of other people. I mean, I just want to enjoy, like I said before, I just want to make all of these decisions so that every day is a good day. And what that looks like, going back to that reference I made about like not keeping the future in sight, like every day is a good day, but to make that happen, I actively have to be thinking about my future and the age of which I'm retiring at and stuff like that. Like I have to take all that stuff into account right now. I'd be negligent not to. But at the end of the day, all of these decisions is just, how can I feel personally satisfied? Comes back to mental health again too. I just kind of made that reference where it's like, how can I just be in a healthy state of mind, man? Because I just, you see a lot of people, some that don't have money, some that do, that just like seem unhappy, and stressed out and feel like they're missing something, or missing some kind of qualification, or missing some appraisal from other people. I don't really care about any of that. You know what I mean? Like I said, like I want all of this stuff to just kind of serve my own motivations and happiness.
Yeah. And I mean, this leads in perfectly to the next question I wanted to ask is just that gap year you took was obviously a very, important time, gave you a lot of time to reflect. And having that time is, kind of an invaluable resource, right? So I'm curious if you see that being something you would do in the future, and what kind of role or what kind of importance you place on having that opportunity, or other people maybe taking advantage of that opportunity.
Do you mean in terms of like a gap period, a reflection
Yeah,
period?
like, it doesn't necessarily need to be a year, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 3 months, but just taking time to kind of not just decompress, but filter out all of the extraneous pressures and influences so that you can kind of narrow down into, the niches that you actually find satisfying, because, you can get caught up in the day-to-day so easily. And, it takes a significant amount of time to isolate what was your priority versus what are the priorities that have been ingrained into you for the sake of, completing your job.
Yeah, so I would say that ideally, I do have the space, the resources, right, money saved up and what have you, to take that time between jobs if necessary. Um, and it's a luxury in some sense, I would say. I think you might have touched on this in one of your videos. If not, it's something we've obviously touched on in conversation. Like a lot of people are very, very undersaved with their money, and a lot of people couldn't afford that luxury of being able to take a little bit of a gap. Part of my strategy is to kind of basically live below my means. I mean, I live a decent lifestyle for sure, but just like in a way that allows you to save money up, and that, amongst other things, would give you the opportunity to take that gap. Um, Now, I'm an analytical person, right? So I'm hoping that all of these temperature checks that I'm taking along the way would allow me to not need that if that would put a financial burden on me or any other kind of burden, like if I had a good opportunity coming up that came out of nowhere and it was less of like a, hey, give it a month to think about it, more like a, you got to take this opportunity like now. I hope that I'm in a place where I can trust myself to make that decision. But yeah, I would like to take more of those times. The only downside is like that's also time not spent earning an income that could be invested to kind of accelerate the retirement process. So you could argue that you're taking time away from, again, the retirement, the infinite time off process, time, moving it up. But it truly was invaluable as a reflection period. And, we talk about it in a professional mindset in terms of reflection, but just as like a leisurely opportunity it was in some sense it's similar to what a vacation offers you, where it's except vacations are so short and fleeting, and this really didn't feel that way, so it really satisfied that itch, which is good because one of the things that people like to poke fun at you when you're in school and complaining about this or that, but maybe on summer break, they're like, well, soak it up because like you're about to start working every week for the next 45 years of your life. So it's nice to be able to deviate from that, take that time, break that mold, save some money, get to have that opportunity to reflect, and not have to just live in the monotony of working for someone else for 45 years straight, essentially every week, minus the fleeting vacation here or there. And I know one or two people who have taken like years off between jobs, which has value to it. And I think you could argue that that's maybe better than retiring at the age of 50 instead of 65, because it's like you can work when you're 50 and then work for 5 years and then take another break if you can afford it, or at the age of 50, hopefully if you're working 50, 60, whatever age, you're doing something because you love it. So maybe it's not a bad thing to move some of that time up. So I would like to take that opportunity again. Um, but if it doesn't allow for itself or it's not entirely necessary, then maybe I don't.
Yeah, I think personally, obviously, I'm coming up on a significant transition too, as getting out of the military, and something that I have, reflected on throughout, in an isolated setting, and also, bouncing ideas off of you and other friends, is the different aspects of my current life that are going to be wildly different than, in the future, and what I want my life to look like, as we mentioned earlier, like lifestyle design and that kind of stuff. And I think that it's probably something I will do, probably not a year, probably closer to a couple months. But I do think it's something that, if you have the opportunity, and I think that it definitely is a luxury, but if you have the opportunity to do it, it can kind of serve as a course correction. And, in the way that you described, like, maybe you retire a couple of years later because you're taking some time off from working, but because you had a couple more course corrections, you found your niche earlier, or maybe at all, if you weren't to do it at all and just wake up 12 years down the line in your career and realize this is not what I want to continue doing. And I'm a very analytical person too, and I'm also kind of a min-maxer, especially when it comes to finances. I like to make the most of my money, and I'm frugal. And I think I would say the same about you. So it can kind of be, antithetical to the idea of just taking months off at a time. But, at the same time, as we mentioned earlier, like, money is not the final goal, and taking that time off can provide an invaluable resource that will pay dividends beyond, the realm of finance.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I might have oversold, like you just said, I think I might have oversold a little bit, all of those ideas, at least the way I feel about them, because I agree. I mean, I think it can just add so much, and it can also offer such a decompression, which I think is really necessary. Again, I mean, if for nothing else, from a mental health perspective too, like, fortunately, I have a habit of, like, reaching burnout sometimes before having these introspections, and burnout's basically a short way of saying, like, you've been dealing with, like, a heavy load of stress. So, and that's not healthy, and it's not good for your mental health. And however you need to, take those times to decompress and correct your course and get back on track.
Well, thank you for coming on, Seamus. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and sharing your experiences and your stories and your insights.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Really, really genuinely excited to listen to it back.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, and I'll have you back on sometime soon, hopefully.
Absolutely down for that.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned on YouTube and Spotify for new episodes of the podcast every week. In the description will be links to my guests, as well as other content that I put out. And as always, keep an open mind.